Atlus games are, for the most part, some of the most polished experiences out there when it comes to bugs, glitches, and exploits. I can't really think of any case of me running into a game-breaking bug while playing, but that doesn't mean the games are immune to oversights. In fact, there's quite a few of them out there you can use to gain an advantage, or just to break the game for fun. Here's some of the many glitches and exploits you can do in the Persona games. The original P3, that's Persona 3, not FES, has plenty of bugs which negatively impact the experience. But there is one glitch that works only on this version and actually does benefit you, allowing you to become practically immune to insta-kill spells. First, open your inventory and take note of how many Homunculus you have, or preferably sell them all until you only have one. Get a persona with either Mahama or Mamudo and get into a battle with Cowardly Mayas in the first block of Tartarus. Just one is not enough. You need at least two in the field. The reason why is because when you use the insta-kill spell, for each Maya that is in the field, you will lose one Homunculus. Therefore, if you have one and consume two, the number will become negative. Make sure you see the message saying the Homunculus took the hit, and that's how you know that the number went down. Once you're in the negatives, just leave the battle. Opening the inventory can sometimes break the game at this point, so rather than risking it, just get a new Homunculus through any means. It can be a chest or by visiting the antique store. You'll notice that your amount held suddenly jumps from a glitched number back to 99. FES has some of the cooler exploits, including perhaps the most well-known glitch in the entire series, one that allows you to skip the final boss entirely and get straight to the game's good ending, and all it takes is a little money. President Tanaka, just like most other social links in the game, was actually one of the many people you spend time with during daytime slots. However, when FES came out, adding the Aigis social link and a more deliberate focus on making it possible to complete all of them in just one playthrough, Tanaka had to be moved to the mall area and be turned into a nighttime link. This creates the very unfortunate, or fortunate depending on your intentions, side effect of his NPC being at the mall during the final night of the game. To replicate this bug, you're going to need Hermit rank 4 and at least rank 4 charm. Interact with Tanaka at least twice and agree to pay him, but don't do it a third time for now. You don't want to actually start the social link. Choose to let Ryoji live so you can access the month of January, and then, on the final night of the game, perform the final payment. If Tanaka's social link had already started, nothing would have happened, but because the third payment forces you into a cutscene, the calendar is then called forward. In the original game, this would have been fine because the next slot would be the final night. But in FES, the next time slot with any code in it is March 3rd, skipping the final boss entirely. What's funny is this was found by the speedrunning community quite a while after the game's release, but all this time, there was one person on Game FAQs who had seen the bug, made a thread about it, and no one noticed for years. When I was testing this, I found out that if you somehow get to the final night without having chosen to let Ryoji live, rather than skip to the ending, the calendar proceeds as normal to February 1st. The entire month is playable, and you can continue all your social links this way, but it creates a bug where whoever greets you at night becomes the only person in the room, in a really weird way. But for those who don't want to skip the final boss, there's an exploit in the battle itself you can take advantage of to make it half as difficult. In fact, Bubble Tea made use of this in their attempt to beat FES with as low a level as possible. Shoutouts to that Marinkar encounter sitting at 0 for the entire duration of the video. That is amazing. Nyx has 2 turns in the original Persona 3. Not actions, but actual turns, meaning every buff and debuff counter ticks twice every time they do something. You can completely break this using repel magic. If Nyx uses an AoE attack while not in critical HP idle animation and it defeats the current phase, every phase after will only act once. Obviously, there aren't many phases where reflecting works, especially early on, but that's what break skills are for. Break resistance, put up walls, and hope the damage is sufficient. If you choose to do this with Mitsuru's Ice Break, as soon as you're confident that it will work, which is around the 20 to 30% HP range, set everyone to support or stand by, and Mitsuru to support. The reason you need to time it well is because Ice Break will have its duration tick twice per turn. Once you do pull it off, the rest of the battle should be quite a pushover. Reload's version might also only act once, but at least that one wasn't just spamming basic spells at random amounts of power. Debuffs will also last twice as long, letting you more consistently stack Tarunda and Rakunda at the same time. You can also skip just about every other boss in FES by performing a series of frame-perfect inputs. Because the trigger for Tartarus bosses is requires a very thin activation zone, by opening Fuka's menu just as you're about to enter, then opening it over and over on the one frame where you can control the player after closing it, you can very slowly inch outside of the activation zone and walk past the gatekeepers, skipping the battle. This is very good for speedruns, but it has very little use in a casual playthrough, since you'll want all the XP you can get in this game. It's also frame perfect. I had to slow down the game to about 25% and abuse a ton of save states just to pull it off consistently, so it's hardly worth the hassle. I actually did manage to do it once, with the game being sped up, and then never again. God knows I don't want to try that a second time. If you want a game where this glitch is actually effective, ironically, the remake has the exact same exploit, and we'll get to that later. Persona 3 saw the addition of the Tiredness system, and while I personally loved it, many people did not, and the main issue is that it interrupted people's grinding sessions as party members would insist on going home by themselves. Did you know that you can skip this entirely? Persona 3 doesn't actually send tired party members back to the dorm. It only sends your tired party members. So if they're not actually in the party by the time you return to the entrance, they'll be tired, but they won't leave, and you can force them back into your party. There's no real reason you should ever want to do this, but if you're really trying to stretch out that one extra boss battle, this is an option. First, you have to find the stairs on any floor, and then find a shadow nearby. By telling your party to attack it, then immediately ditching them and going up the stairs, you'll be alone, but then you can take a teleporter back. Once you're back at the entrance, everyone will still be waiting for you because they're not in your party. They'll be tired, and they'll be complaining, but they will not be leaving. This isn't the only exploit you can do using the split-up mechanic, as you can climb all of Tartarus and the Abyss of Time without even lifting a finger. Because shadows actually only ever spawn around the player and not the party, by splitting up on every floor and not moving, the party will sweep the entire floor without any shadow contact. They will open chests and go up the stairs, all without you doing anything. The only cost is, of course, that any chests opened by party members which contain money will be lost. But in combat, there's also exploity stuff going on. The all-out attack is an almighty skill in the game's code, using the power of everyone's weapons. But for some reason, in the PS2 versions of Persona 3, it's considered a normal magic almighty skill, and as such, it will scale off of Mind Charge if the protagonist has it currently active. This is huge damage, and might be fun to pull off if you're not doing something like the Stunlock strat, which requires leaving enemies downed. And for a bug that does absolutely nothing but ruin your persona, if you mutate a skill into Vorpal Blade or Wary Thrust in the Journey, it will be a bugged version that only costs 1% of your HP, but also only does 1 damage. This happens because the game is actually trying to give you the version from the answer, which has a different ID due to the tired status not existing in the expansion. The problem is that while the skill is there, none of its data is. So you just get a dummy non-functional skill that actually does 0 damage, but it's rounded back up to 1, as 0 damage is impossible in the game's code. You can, under very specific conditions, get all-out attack to trigger twice in Persona 3 Portable. There's no real application for this in runs or anything, but it is fun to pull off. The most consistent way to get it to happen is in the Hanged Man Full Moon boss battle. Analyze one of the statues and take your turn. Then, the next party member to act has to knock everyone down to get the all-out attack, while also defeating the enemy that is meant to be analyzed. In the case of this boss, this means defeating all the statues. Fuka's analysis fails, and instead it gets replaced with a second automatic all-out attack. It's not the most useful exploit, but it's always nice when it happens. To make sure that the second party member is one that can defeat all statues at the same time, with an AoE skill preferably, you can actually choose the order in which your party acts in boss battles by manually adding them to your party. The order in which you add them is the order in which they will act. This also works in Persona 3 Reload, but it only works for bosses. For normal battles, it is still determined by your agility. And while bugs become significantly rarer as we go, Reload has quite a few exploits of its own. Fuka's Sylphid aura is pretty useful in the early game before you gain access to Auto Marakukaja and Auto Masukukaja. It boosts the party's defense, accuracy, and evasion at the start of the next battle. Because retrying a battle works by loading a kind of quick save, if you lose in a battle where Sylphid aura was active, you don't actually lose it after winning, because retry loads you after the trigger that would have removed the effect. This means that in the next battle, you will still have the effect active. If you're doing mandatory battles only, this means that you can technically carry Sylphid Aura with you throughout the entire block, casting it only once. Is this functionally pointless? Yeah, but 35 SP is 35 SP. Something that's much more useful as an exploit is skipping the game's bosses entirely. A lot of the game's boss battles are activated by directly stepping into a trigger zone somewhere on the map, just like the original game. If the game's frame rate is extremely laggy, however, there's a chance that you can walk through the entire trigger zone before the game has any time to realize that you've been in it, effectively skipping the boss. This means that you need to find a way to lag the game on purpose, which for PC players is very easily done by alt-tabbing in and out while in full screen mode, not borderless, which when timed right lets you bypass many of the game's dialogue trigger zones. This is especially useful if you're speedrunning the game, but is ironically also a way to get a massive XP boost. Just like most other Atlus games, the larger the level difference between you and an enemy you defeat, the more experience you'll gain afterwards. The difference, however, is that Atlus didn't quite think it through for reload. At 8, 9, and 10 levels below the enemy, the experience received is doubled, tripled, and quadrupled respectively. This means that if you're already in that difference range, it's actually worse to grind experience because quadrupling the experience gained from a full moon shadow, other gatekeepers, or even the Reaper is going to boost you way more and way faster than normally grinding experience. But how can someone beat the Reaper at more than 10 levels below? Well, what if I said you can do it as low as level 14? Don't actually try it at this level, because it takes hundreds of hours of planning, reloading saves, and several attempts, but it is technically possible. Reload's version of the Reaper does not negatively react to reflects and repels, so if you can always have that protection up, you can slowly whittle its HP down. The problem, of course, is that at any moment the Reaper can choose to use Megidolon or something else that completely ruins your attempt, and that's where Weird Takoyaki comes in. This generally useless healing item has a small chance to inflict fear on whoever uses it, and ironically, because fear makes it more likely for you to take critical hits, the Reaper will stop everything it's doing and continuously try to crit you for as long as you're feared. This means you know with 100% certainty that the Reaper will always use fizz skills, and sometimes instant kills, which can be nulled anyway, allowing you to take full control over the fight and repel any attacks until the fight is over. The reason this is possible at such a low level is because you can technically use the mutation mechanic, which is the low chance of skills mutating into something random of a higher tier. With a lot of careful planning and reloading, you can get immunities to both types of insta-kill and repel passives for all physical damage, giving you the perfect build to attempt this. Being the only living party member quadruples the XP gained because there's no one to share it with, and being more than 10 levels below the Reaper will quadruple it again, propelling you all the way to level 99. I know this sounds tempting, but again, I can't overstate how much of a pointless time sink this is, unless you really just want to do it for the novelty. You're way better off waiting until later, as the boss itself isn't that hard to cheese using techniques like Divine Intervention from Ken. And you may have noticed this already, but every battle in Reload, both random and bosses, are actually really not that random at all. In the vast majority of cases, you will always get the exact same order of random battles, which resets back to the first one if you save and reload. Boss AI is also almost always predetermined. You can usually always expect the same order of actions in most battles, and also rest assured that the vast majority of single target skills specifically target not ID 1, meaning avoid hitting the protagonist unless there is no other option. Because of this, most battles can be learned, which is fairly useful. If for some reason you really want to grind in this game, you can force gold hand shadows to spawn by quickly cycling through floors. Because Tartarus in Reload doesn't refresh until you leave, if you just use the fast travel menu to climb a floor, you can quickly check if a floor has a gold hand and immediately skip to the next if it doesn't. This also works for farming red shadows. Persona 4 is actually surprisingly stable when it comes to glitches and exploits, with a lot of the ones that do exist being really obscure and poorly documented. I was only able to find a few unintended exploits across both versions of Persona 4, but there is a handful of intended ways to break the game which are quite amusing. The original Persona 4 did not award any XP for defeating golden hands, but players wanting to gain big XP and money fast could do so closer to the game's ending, in the Magatsu Inaba dungeon. By By equipping a persona that reflects Fizz, ideally but not necessarily null rage equipment and weak weapons, you can challenge a pair of Great Kings on the first floor of Magatsu Mandala. Wait until they summon 3 minions, then let them kill your party members while reflecting attacks with the protagonist. Once that's done, just turn on Rush. That's it. You can leave the game running for as long as you want. Because XP and money is awarded to you per enemy defeated, when you come back, you can find yourself with tons of XP and money gained by doing virtually nothing. Of course, if you want your party to actually gain XP alongside you, you have to revive them before leaving. But it's worth noting that XP does have a limit, and it is not the number that shows up on the results. It's actually half of that, closer to 32k. So for XP, this isn't the smartest idea, and giving it all to the protagonist might benefit you more because of what it unlocks in terms of fusion. But for money, you can absolutely reach the 9 million limit in one go. This is definitely one of those glitches you'd do as a kid back in the day on a Friday night, then wake up Saturday morning to keep playing. Golden, like every other re-release in the series, fixed this in exchange for an intended broken grinding method, and also introduced a cap of 99,999 to gain rewards. Ironically, because of this, the XP cap in Golden is actually higher. Also in the original Persona 4, if you have Yukiko or Teddy with a resurrection skill and in the heal support tactic mode, they can revive someone out of the final boss's 1000 Curses scripted kill. The character will be invisible, and this does absolutely nothing but waste time since you've already won, but it's the kind of funny glitch that belongs in a video like this. The order in which your party defends you is random, so it might take a few tries. If you're using save states, RNG in Persona 4 changes with every menu selection, so cycle through your items to get a different result every time you load a save state. Golden's most famous grinding method is of course Golden Hands, who are weak to Almighty and give significant amounts of XP and money. Farming those is of course always a good idea, but where a lot of people go wrong is trying to only seek hands out and ignoring everything else. Persona 4 Golden made very big changes to how shuffle time works, and with it, gaining Magician, Emperor, and stat cards has never been easier. One of the most common pieces of advice Persona players are given is to fuse as much as possible and to never grow attached to your initial persona. For P4G, you should consider taking the exact opposite advice. Definitely fuse for elemental resistances, social link bonuses, and specific things that you need, but by finishing every battle with Izanagi equipped and picking as many of those major arcana cards as you possibly can, you will gain stats, levels, and skill upgrades far faster than any XP farming could possibly net you. Izanagi is a good pick because you can boost him up from the very start of the game, he nulls dark, resists elec, and despite being tagged as neutral to light, every persona the protagonist can equip secretly resists both insta-kill types, with those tagged as weaknesses behaving normally. Izanagi also learns some of the game's most useful buffs and starts with Cleave, meaning that by getting through enough Magician cards, usually around Rise's dungeon, you should already have a persona with God's Hand, Marakukaja, Matarukaja, and Marakunda. With skill cards, you can also have AoE Physical and even Megidolon. One of the most useful skills you can get through Mutation is Victory Cry. Usually reserved to New Game Plus personas or other special requirements, in P4G you can actually get it as early as level 24. On special skill change fusion forecast days, you can mutate a random skill in a newly fused persona, with the result being any skill of equivalent rank. The thing is, ranks rarely, if ever, correlate with progression and leveling. Victory Cry has a rank of 7, which means any rank 7 skill your persona has can become Victory Cry. As luck would have it, Kaiwan is a level 24 persona with the skill Tetrakarn, which is rank 7. This outlier lets you roll for the self-restoring passive very early on. I don't recommend trying this unless you really want to. You can sort of manipulate it and increase your chances by either having less skills on the resulting persona or multiple rank 7 skills inherited, but it's at worst a 1 in 8 chance to land on Tetrakarn, followed by a 1 in 23 chance to be Victory Cry, and not one of the other rank 7 skills. Compounded luck put together, you're unironically better off trying to pull whoever's up on the current Phantom X banner. I recorded myself getting this despite already having a persona with Victory Cry just to see how long it would take, and I got some bangers like Repel Passives and Arms Master, but it did take 20 minutes of retrying until Victory Cry finally dropped, and that was me being extremely lucky. I have lost several hours trying to get other mutations in other playthroughs. Other skills that are nice to have are the auto AoE buff passive passives which are rank 6 and can easily mutate off of skills like Power and Mind Charge. In the Vita version of Persona 4 Golden, there was a glitch that allowed you to get 99 Makaracorn. To do this, you'd need at least 1 Tetracorn, 0 Makaracorns, and access to the quest 2 types of corn from late July. If you have Makaracorn, sell them before turning the quest in. Once turning in the quest, you'll lose 1 Tetracorn and 1 Makaracorn, but as you have 0, it will underflow and become 99. So, why is this happening? Because the PC version fixed it, I actually went and took a look at the game's code. On the PC version, you can see it checking if you have more than 0 of each item, which means 1 or more. Otherwise, it skips the dialogue to clear the quest. Now, let's take a look at the Vita version. Both item IDs are there, but as you can see, just the item IDs. The actual function to check if you have Makaracorn isn't there, so the number is just a number that doesn't mean anything. The PC version fixed this typo. You may have noticed the glitch was recorded on the PC version, and that's because I just copy-pasted the Vita code over to PC, restoring the bug. It just works. The only difference in the 2 files really is just this one typo. Persona 5 thankfully has a lot more exploits compared to the previous main entry, with a handful of them working in both versions. Now, I actually planned on porting these bugs back into Royal because setting up vanilla Persona 5 in 2025 is a hassle. I had to set up the mod compendium, which is a tool we haven't used since 2022. RPCS3 keeps regressing. The only way to have proper working bust-ups is with a 9GB 4K bust-ups mod, otherwise it looks like this abomination. But I actually went ahead and installed it and got some old save files just for this video. In the original Persona 5, Ryuji's insta-kill saved you plenty of time, but didn't do you any favors in regards to farming money and XP. To get a ton of early money in the original P5, players abused an exploit involving Pulinpa and Mementos bosses. When confused, enemies had a chance to drop a little money every turn. Bosses drop a lot, and the amount is highly influenced by your Persona's luck stat. Not every boss can be confused, in fact, most of them null it, as is the usual for bosses in Persona games. Once they've been confused, just guard, healing is necessary. SP Adhesive can restore your SP so you can indefinitely cast Pulinpa and Medea to stay in the fight. Every confusable boss can get you the game's maximum money, which is generally enough for a normal playthrough, but you'll need a ton if you want to do more intricate builds. The way Royal nerfed this was by making confusion heal after 1 turn regardless of stats, which means having to cast Pulinpa a lot more, as well as having to manage resources and healing more closely, making it not very worth attempting when there's so many other alternatives to make money in Royal. Really, just getting Ryuji's insta-kill ability will net you way more money without you even being aware that you're grinding in the first place. And for XP, there's the famous Flu Season glitch. Weather affects shadows and mementos, and Flu Season can make certain shadows sick with despair. The ailment makes enemies unable to act, and after 3 turns, they will succumb, automatically winning the battle. Atlus forgot to make the Reaper immune to this, meaning that during Flu Season, you can gain a gigantic XP boost for free by getting into combat with the Reaper, repeatable as many times as you need until everyone is level 99. Royal fixed this by making it so that the Reaper cannot start combat despaired. Even if you were to mod the game's files to make them vulnerable to despair, you can inflict it, but not trigger it through Flu Season. Another way to gain extra XP, although an impractical one, involves the use of damage repelling. Rewards are awarded per defeated enemy at the end of the battle. However, in the original version of P5, if an enemy uses an AoE skill and everyone in your party reflects it, as long as the first reflect defeats it, the game will recognize every subsequent reflect as it defeating the enemy again, resulting in upwards of 4 times XP and money for that battle. Royal fixed this exploit by making it so that once an enemy is defeated, they cannot take additional hits. While Royal buffed Ryuji's insta-kill ability to give XP and money, it's not the only way to gain money in Royal. When knocking down every shadow and starting a holdup, you can demand money and items. With certain Sun Arcana Confidant perks, you can continually demand more and more, and the amounts are pretty good too. If you demand too much, they'll get mad at you and go back to attacking, but you can start over again if you knock them down once more. A really efficient way to just rack up a bunch of money at once is to have a persona with weak versions of every element and good SP recovery so you can stick around until they run away. For certain shadows who drop extremely desirable rare items, it's also a way to get them to drop a ton of them without having to get lucky with several shadow spawns. Once you get Ryuji's insta-kill, farming money becomes a lot more efficient, but this is a nice and fast way to rack up a ton of money early game without backtracking to grind a bunch of extra battles. Equipment is often overlooked in Persona games. In Reload, it's a great way to give your party members extra damage boosting passives, making their Thurgies hit the thousands, and this is true in Royal too, but there's another equipment type that is a lot better than it seems. Because of an oversight in the game's code, the effects of equipment are applied twice, once to the character on the act of equipping, and a second time due to the checks that happen when the battle first starts. In 99% of cases, this has no effect, because the same effect cannot stack with itself. The exception is equipment which grants stats: strength, magic, endurance, agility, and luck. Because of this, any piece of equipment which would for example give you 2 strength is actually giving you 4 strength. Plus 11 to all stats is actually plus 22 to all stats. It doesn't show on the stat screen, it doesn't even show in battle, but I assure you that it does work on all versions of Persona 5. In the Akechi boss at the cruise ship, you can entirely skip the Robin Hood phase of the boss by doing an all-out attack on the Berserk Shadows that he summons at the start. Once Cerberus is the only enemy left, down him by exploiting his ice weakness. If the all-out attack defeats him, rather than proceeding into the next phase of the battle, you will get the end card instead, immediately skipping over to the Black Mask phase of the battle. Royal patched the Flu Season exploit for defeating the Reaper, but that doesn't mean the battle is without exploits in this version of the game. While the Reaper generally attacks twice, for whatever reason, allowing it to ambush the party will result in it always acting once, which, just like the Nyx glitch from earlier in the video, makes the battle much easier to deal with. If you have any repel effect active, the Reaper will also do a loop of Concentrate and Megidolon, which, again, might sound scary, but remember, Almighty is effectively much weaker than everything else due to the lack of boost passives for it. Paired with only acting once, if you're underleveled and need some extra defense while slowly whittling the enemy down, you can guard before it attacks and strike while it's concentrating. The best way to get a repel effect up from the start is with the Ring of Gluttony from the Bank Palace. After December 24th, for plot reasons, the Strength Arcana Confidant becomes unavailable. However, there's an exploit that allows you to continue ranking it even after the deadline. First, consult a guide to figure out which persona you would have needed to rank up. Buy it from the Persona Compendium, then leave the Velvet Room. Enter again, then talk to Igor. Close the conversation and choose I still have business here. Then talk to Lavenza and choose I don't need anything. This will summon the twins and rank up the Confidant. I know it's not a Persona game, but it's also just a singular title that doesn't warrant its own video. So because of that, for today's bonus content, we have Metaphor ReFantazio exploits. There are no glitches in Metaphor that I'm aware of, but there are a few exploity tricks as well as one pretty interesting bug. For example, the red crystals in the game's many dungeons will infinitely spawn enemies until you destroy them. While it's clear that the intent is to punish you for taking too long to destroy it, if you have the mage or merchant archetypes, you can stick around in a safe space and defeat the infinitely respawning enemies for infinite rewards. Mage will slowly restore your MP, and merchant will net you a bunch of reeve. The enemies will also drop items, which in certain dungeons includes a bunch of MP items. Spend a couple minutes in one of these, and you'll come out rich. And by using the Thief archetype, you can pickpocket a rare item from a variety of enemies. This only works once per enemy. However, escaping does not despawn the enemy. It leaves them in the field and restores its held item. Because some enemies in the game hold extremely powerful and valuable items, this is a very convenient trick. Good examples are stealing Debilitate consumables from the Cyclops enemies and Incense from certain enemies, which carries over into New Game Plus and Regicide difficulty. A similar trick involves Merchant's Debt Collection skill and the rare Elmenta enemies. Because they escape every turn, all mag you take will receive the Unscathed Triumph bonus. Every dungeon has an Elmenta guaranteed spawn, and they will always respawn until you defeat them. Because of this, going to Academia and returning will continuously respawn the Elmenta, letting you farm tons and tons of mag really quickly. This is best done in dungeons where the Elmenta is really close by to a safe spot, so you can cycle quickly. Debt collection is extremely MP intensive, so make sure you also have some form of powerful MP recovery to keep up so you can farm for longer. Having multiple merchants will also let you take more mag at once, which means more extra mag from the Unscathed bonus. Another trick you can do involving the Thief archetype has you farming tons of archetype XP items really fast. While Steal nets you an enemy's rare drop, the protagonist's overworld ability will net you their common drop whenever you stun them or defeat them in real-time combat. Because of this, To pull the trick off, you need to be within the level range that does not instantly defeat the enemy. There are 2 enemies that drop the 1000 and 3000 AEXP items, which are the Mimitex at the Tomb of Lament in Brilhaven and the Disgraced Ruins at levels 33 and 65 respectively. Make sure you get to these dungeons before overleveling the Mimics, then stun them in real-time combat to get a leaf. Ambush them, then escape immediately, which is guaranteed due to the stun. Make sure you don't actually defeat the Mimitex as they don't respawn. Instead, you can leave and re-enter the dungeon as often as necessary to restore their health. To make farming sessions last longer, equip the worst possible weapons you can so the ambush volley does less damage. Escaping will always restore some of the enemy's HP, but not all of it, so you will eventually kill it by constantly ambushing in and out of a fight. Doing this will net you a ton of AEXP leaves, letting you master all your archetypes really quick. Modern Megaten is all about passive stacking, and Metaphor is no exception. But there is a passive in this game that doesn't work quite right. In fact, it doesn't work at all. High Voltage increases your crit rate by 15% after getting an ambush. Here's the problem. Opening volley and stun does not actually count as an ambush, so it's impossible for the player to benefit from this. Well, what about the enemy? There are absolutely 0 enemies in the game with high voltage. This means that this skill does absolutely nothing throughout the entire game. Because of how the game is programmed, any turn where a buff or debuff effect runs out will completely skip ailment recovery. This means that if you inflict something like Forget, while cycling through Tarunda, Rakunda, and Sukunda every turn, the game will literally not allow the enemy to recover from the ailment, entering a permanent state of Stunlock. There's very few situations where you can actually take advantage of this due to how many enemies strongly resist or even null ailments, but in the few where it does work, it's a really funny strategy to pull off. This is hardly the full list of exploits in the series. There's way more, and obviously I haven't forgotten Persona 1 and Persona 2, but there actually aren't many exploits I know of in those games, so I didn't include them today. If there's anything you're aware of that you think would be cool to share, don't hesitate to let me know in the comments, and I might make a follow-up video if there's enough to warrant it. For now, I want to give thanks to all these members of the Megaten community who have made this video possible either directly or indirectly, as well as thanks to you for watching.